For most of my life, I believed one simple rule. If you don't cause problems, problems won't come looking for you. I built my entire life around that idea. I went to work on time, paid my bills, didn't argue with neighbors, didn't get involved in things that weren't my business. From the outside, my life looked quiet, predictable, safe, and for years, I thought that meant I was doing everything right. I was wrong. It didn't start with something dramatic. No strange calls, no threats, no shadows following me home. It started with something so small that I almost ignored it. Almost. One morning, I stopped at the same cafe I had visited for nearly 12 years. Same order, same seat by the window. The barista handed me my coffee and said, casually, "Rough night again?" I looked up. "I slept fine," I replied. She froze for half a second, then smiled. "Sorry, I must have mixed you up with someone else." I laughed it off, but the truth was I hadn't slept well, not for weeks. At 53, insomnia stops feeling temporary. It becomes part of your routine. You wake up at 3:17 a.m. You stare at the ceiling. You think about things you haven't thought about in decades. That morning, I told myself it was a coincidence. People guess. People assume. That's what normal life is made of. Still, something about the way she said it stayed with me. A few days later, another small thing happened. I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. No stamp that stood out. Inside was a single piece of paper. No threats. No message. Just one sentence. "You've kept things together better than I expected." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and threw it away. I told myself the same thing I told myself my whole life. Don't create meaning where there isn't any. That sentence had saved me more than once. But meaning has a way of finding you anyway. The next week, my neighbor stopped me in the hallway. We lived on the same floor for 6 years. We barely spoke. He looked uncomfortable, like he was about to cross a line. "Hey," he said. "Strange question. Do you work nights sometimes?" "No," I said. "Why?" He shrugged. "I thought I saw your light on at 3 or 4 in the morning." "A lot." My stomach tightened. I smiled. Must have been someone else. He nodded and walked away. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to his door close. That night, I checked. Every light in my apartment was off by midnight. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. again. My bedroom was dark, but the light in my living room was on. I sat up slowly. I knew I had turned it off. I always did. That was the moment I stopped pretending everything was normal. Over the following days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. A man at the grocery store commented on a brand I used to buy 10 years ago. A co-worker referenced a conversation I'd had in private. A taxi driver asked me if I still blamed myself for something I'd never told him about. None of them knew they were doing it. That was the worst part. They weren't threatening me. They weren't warning me. They were confirming something. Someone knew my life, not the version I showed people. The real one. The quiet decisions. The moments I never spoke about. The choice I made years ago that shaped everything that came after. I had spent decades believing silence was neutral, that it couldn't hurt anyone, that if you didn't speak, you weren't responsible. Now, silence felt very loud. I went back to the cafe. Same seat, same coffee. The barista smiled. Before she could say anything, I asked, "Do you know me?" She blinked. "Only from here." "Had we talked before?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but you look like someone who listens more than he talks." That sentence hit harder than it should have, because it was true. I had always been good at listening, especially when staying quiet was easier. That night, I found another envelope under my door. This one was thicker. Inside were printed photographs. My apartment building, my usual walking route, a picture of me taken from across the street. No message, just proof. I sat on my couch for a long time, holding those photos. I wasn't scared. Not yet. What I felt was worse. Recognition. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. Someone wasn't trying to ruin my life. They were revisiting it. And suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in over 20 years. A moment when I chose to stay silent. A moment that ended one life and allowed mine to continue untouched. At least, that's what I had believed. That night, for the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided my entire life. What if silence isn't harmless? What if it just takes longer to come back to you? There's a strange thing about memory. You don't forget the important moments. You just learn how to step around them. I had done that for years. Decades, actually, until the photographs forced me to stop pretending. 22 years earlier, I was a different man, not younger in spirit, just less careful. I worked in an office where everyone knew everyone, but no one trusted anyone. Budgets disappeared. Reports were adjusted. Questions were discouraged. I noticed things early. Numbers that didn't line up. Emails sent at odd hours. Meetings that happened without calendars. Nothing illegal on its own. Just enough to suggest a pattern. At first, I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. That's how it always starts. Then one afternoon, a woman from accounting stopped by my desk. Her name was Elena. She didn't sit down, didn't smile. She leaned in slightly and said, "If anyone asks, you didn't see what you saw." I laughed. "What are you talking about?" She straightened up. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." She walked away. A week later, Elena didn't come to work. They said she'd taken personal leave. The next week, HR announced she'd resigned. No goodbye email. No farewell lunch. Just gone. I told myself that was normal. People leave jobs all the time. Then I found the folder. It was mislabeled, placed where it didn't belong. Inside were documents that confirmed everything. Fake vendors. Circular payments. Money moving through accounts that led back to the same 3 names. One of them belonged to my manager. Another belonged to a man whose office door was always closed. The third name stopped me cold. Elena. She hadn't resigned. She'd been removed. I remember sitting there, staring at those papers, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not fear, responsibility. Because now I knew, and knowing changed the rules. I didn't sleep that night. I rehearsed conversations in my head. With HR, with legal, with myself. I imagined being praised for doing the right thing. I imagined being ignored. I imagined being blamed. But I never imagined what actually happened. The next morning, Elena was waiting near the elevators. I hadn't seen her in weeks. She looked thinner, older. She hadn't asked how I was. She said, "You found it." I didn't deny it. She nodded slowly. "They'll bury you," she said, "or they'll use you. Either way, you don't win." "Then why tell me?" I asked. Her expression didn't change. Because I didn't want to be alone knowing. The elevator arrived. She didn't step in. Neither did I. 2 days later, there was an internal investigation. It moved quickly. Too quickly. Certain names disappeared from the reports. Others were highlighted. Mine was mentioned once. As a witness. A silent one. They asked me if I had seen anything unusual. I said no. They asked if anyone had spoken to me. I said no. They asked if I felt pressured. I said no. Every answer was technically true, because silence leaves room to hide. Elena wasn't mentioned again. Not officially. A month later, I heard she had moved away. 6 months after that, someone said she'd had an incident. No details, just a lowered voice and a quick change of subject. I never asked. That was my real decision. Not the lies, the refusal to ask. Years passed. The company thrived. I got promoted, moved apartments, built a life that looked clean on the surface. And for a long time, I believe I had escaped the consequences. Until now. Until strangers spoke my thoughts out loud. Until lights turned on by themselves. Until someone proved they knew where I lived, how I moved, what I remembered. Someone had reopened a file I thought was closed forever. I went back to my apartment and opened the photographs again. This time, I noticed something I had missed. A reflection in one of the windows. A figure standing behind the camera. Blurry. Intentional. They wanted me to see it. That night, I didn't turn off the living room light. I sat there waiting. At 3:17 a.m., my phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. Just one sentence. She asked you for help. I stared at the screen. My hands were steady. My breathing wasn't. Because whoever this was didn't want money. Didn't want revenge. They wanted something else. They wanted acknowledgement. I typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "You already know." And that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about what I did back then. It was about what I didn't do. And whatever was coming next was going to force me to finally speak. I didn't reply after that message. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I suddenly understood that every word mattered. Whoever was contacting me wasn't guessing. They weren't fishing. They already knew the answers. They wanted to see which version of me still existed. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. Routine is a powerful disguise. Coffee, elevator, polite nods. But I noticed things I used to ignore. A man standing too long near the entrance. A woman on her phone who didn't move when I passed twice. A security camera that followed me just a little too smoothly. Paranoia, I told myself. That's what guilt sounds like when it wakes up. At my desk, I opened an old email archive. I hadn't looked at it in years. I searched for Elena's name. Most messages were gone. Deleted, purged, cleaned, except one. A draft she never sent. No subject line. Just a paragraph. If you're reading this, it means I waited too long. I thought staying quiet would protect me. I was wrong. If anything happens, please don't let them rewrite this. Truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. I closed the laptop. My hands felt cold. She hadn't been asking for help back then. She had been preparing an exit, and I had watched her walk away. That evening, I didn't go home. I walked. No destination. Just movement. That's when I noticed footsteps matching mine. Not close. Not obvious. Just consistent. When I stopped, they stopped. When I turned, they adjusted. I didn't confront them. I didn't run. I kept walking. Silence is something you learn to survive with. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Same number. You still have the folder. I stopped walking. This time, completely. I typed back. How do you know that? The response took longer. Almost a minute. Long enough to feel intentional. Then, because you never destroy evidence. You just hide it where you won't look. They were right. I had moved it years ago. Out of fear. Out of instinct. Out of the hope I'd never need it again. I went home. For the first time in days, I locked the door, sat at the table, and opened the old storage box under my bed. Inside were things I pretended weren't important. Printed emails, notes, copies, and at the bottom, a handwritten page. Elena's handwriting. I didn't remember keeping it, but there it was. It wasn't a confession. It was a list. Names, dates, amounts, and one sentence at the end. If they ever deny this, follow the money backwards. I felt something shift. Not fear. Resolve. Because this wasn't about protecting myself anymore. It was about finishing something that had been left unfinished. The phone vibrated again. One final message for the night. They're watching you right now. So am I? I didn't respond. I turned off the phone. And for the first time in 22 years, I made a decision without calculating the outcome. The next day, I didn't go to work. I went somewhere else. A small office building on the edge of the city. No sign outside, just a buzzer. I pressed it. A voice asked my name. I gave it. There was a pause. Then, "We've been expecting you." Inside, the walls were plain. Too plain. No decoration. No distractions. A man in his 40s sat across from me. He didn't introduce himself. He slid a folder across the table. My folder. Copies of everything. Better organized. More complete. "Why now?" I asked. He leaned back slightly. "Because people think time erases accountability," he said. "It doesn't. It concentrates it." He tapped the folder. "Elena wasn't the only one," he continued. "She was just the one who stopped playing along." My throat tightened. "Is she alive?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was neutral. "She survived, but not without cost." That was enough. When I left the building, the city felt different, not safer, clearer, like the fog had lifted just enough to show the drop ahead. I knew what was coming next. Public questions, private threats, carefully worded denials. And I knew something else too. I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, I turned my phone back on. One new message. "You finally moved." I replied, "Yes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then the final message. Good, because once this starts, it doesn't stop. And for the first time, that didn't scare me, because silence had already taken enough. Once something is exposed to light, it stops being fragile. That was the first thing I learned. The second was this: truth doesn't explode. It spreads, slowly, quietly, and then all at once. I didn't release the documents immediately. That's the mistake people expect. They imagine one dramatic moment, a leak, a headline. Real damage doesn't work like that. I waited, I watched, and I listened. The messages stopped after that night. No threats, no warnings. That worried me more than the silence before, because silence usually means two things. Someone is confident, or someone is reorganizing. 3 days later, a former colleague called me. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. No greeting, no small talk, just one sentence. "They're asking questions about you." I asked who they were. He laughed nervously. "You know exactly who." The next call came from a journalist. Then another. Different outlets. Different cities. Same questions. "Why now? Why you? Why didn't this come out earlier?" I gave them the same answer every time. Because I finally understood the cost of waiting. The first article was cautious. Careful wording. No accusations. Just connections. Names appearing together. Money moving where it shouldn't. The second article was bolder. By the third, denial became impossible. That's when the counterattack started. Not against the story. Against me. Anonymous sources questioned my credibility. Old decisions were reframed. My silence was used as proof of guilt. They didn't deny what happened. They tried to discredit the messenger. That's always the strategy. I didn't respond. I let the documents speak. Because paper doesn't panic. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on my door. No badge. No uniform. Just a man in a simple jacket. He introduced himself. Government oversight. He didn't threaten. He didn't intimidate. He asked questions. Specific ones. The kind that tell you the truth is already moving on its own. "What about Elena?" I asked. He paused. "She's been under protection for years," he said. "New identity. New life." I nodded. I didn't ask where. Some answers are safer when they stay unanswered. The investigation widened. More names surfaced. People resigned quietly. Others retired early. A few disappeared from public view completely. Not prison. Worse. Irrelevance. One evening, months later, I received a letter. Not an email. A real envelope. No return address. Inside was a single page. 3 words written by hand. "Keep going." Still, I recognized the handwriting immediately. I sat there for a long time, not smiling, not crying, just breathing. The story didn't end with applause. It rarely does. There was no moment where everything felt resolved. What happened instead was quieter. The pressure eased. The fear softened. The weight shifted off my chest and settled somewhere else, where it belonged. People sometimes ask me if it was worth it. The risk, the loss, the years of silence. I don't answer right away, because the truth is complicated. But this is what I eventually say. Silence keeps you safe. Truth lets you sleep. I still write, not to expose, not to accuse, but to remember, because stories don't exist to entertain us. They exist to stop us from forgetting what we survived. Every now and then, I pass that old building, the one with no sign. The windows are dark now, empty, like it was never there. But I know better. Some things disappear only after they've been seen. The last message I ever received from that number came a year later. Just one line. No more silence. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because some conversations don't require an answer. They require action. And once taken, they can't be undone.